That summer evening was unusually still, the kind of quiet that makes every sound sharper. My parents had gone out for the night, leaving me alone in the house. At first, I didn't mind. I was used to being by myself, and the thought of having the entire place to myself almost felt like freedom. But as the clock crept toward 9, the silence grew heavier, pressing against me. The hum of the refrigerator, the faint creaks of the wooden floor, even the ticking of the wall clock. Everything sounded louder than usual, as if the house itself was listening. I walked into the kitchen to grab a glass of juice, trying to push away the unease. Our backyard stretched far beyond the kitchen window, the trees swaying gently under the dim glow of the porch light. That's when I noticed it. At the far edge of the yard, near the old wooden fence, a shape was standing, tall, still, and human-like. My body froze instantly, my breath caught in my throat. I blinked hard, convincing myself it was just my imagination playing tricks. For several long seconds, I couldn't move. My mind raced. Was someone out there? Had they been watching me this whole time? Then, as the wind shifted, I realized the figure was nothing more than our patio umbrella leaning awkwardly against the fence. Relief washed over me, followed quickly by embarrassment at my own fear. But even after I sat back down, the image of that shadowy figure lingered. Somewhere deep inside, I couldn't shake the feeling that I hadn't been entirely wrong. That evening, I headed into the kitchen to grab a glass of juice. As I passed by the large window that looked out over the backyard, my eyes froze. At the very end of the yard, right beside the fence, stood a tall, motionless figure. My heart slammed against my chest, and for a moment it felt like all the blood in my body had turned cold. In the dim light, the silhouette looked exactly like a grown man, thin, looming, and unnervingly still, as though it was watching the house. For several long seconds, I couldn't move. My eyes stayed locked on that shape, and my hand trembled as I reached for my phone, ready to call my parents. The thought that someone had broken into the yard was terrifying. Then, after forcing myself to take a closer look, I realized what it was. It wasn't a person at all. It was the patio umbrella we usually left propped up by the fence. Tonight, perhaps the wind had tilted it at an odd angle, and under the weak yellow light from the porch, its shadow had stretched and distorted until it resembled a stranger standing there. Relief rushed through me, mixed with embarrassment. I let out a shaky laugh and muttered to myself that I was overreacting, letting my imagination run wild. I poured my drink, turned off the kitchen light, and headed back toward the living room. But just as I sat down, that uneasy feeling crept back in. Something wasn't right. Against my better judgment, I turned my head to glance out the window one more time. My chest tightened. The umbrella was still in its place, exactly where it had been, but next to it, faintly outlined against the darkness, was another shape. Thinner, taller, unmistakably human. And this time I knew it wasn't a trick of the light. The figure stood perfectly still, like it wanted me to see it. A chill raced down my spine. I yanked the curtains shut, too afraid to keep looking. After seeing that strange figure at the edge of my yard, I couldn't calm down. The image kept replaying in my head, no matter how hard I tried to convince myself it was only the umbrella or a trick of the light. My chest felt tight, and I found myself glancing nervously out the window every few minutes. To distract myself, I turned on my computer and logged in, hoping that chatting with someone might take my mind off it. I told the story to a few friends, but Chris, one of my closest, reacted right away. He asked me detailed questions. What exactly did I see? How tall? What shape? When I told him it looked just like a person standing still, he went silent for a moment before saying, "I'm coming over." 15 minutes later, I heard the screech of bike brakes in my driveway. Chris appeared at the door, half curious, half serious. Relief washed over me. It felt good not to be alone anymore. I led him straight to the backyard and pointed at the exact spot where the figure had been. Together we stared into the shadows. Of course, there was nothing, only the faded patio umbrella leaning against the fence, its fabric flapping slightly in the night breeze. Chris chuckled, shaking his head. "Man, you're spooking yourself. Too many horror stories before bed." I tried to laugh along, but deep inside I wasn't convinced. Just before we turned back inside, my eyes caught the faintest glimpse of movement near the fence. A darker patch of shadow, shifting slightly. I froze, but Chris didn't seem to notice, so I kept silent. We ended up in the living room, settling down with video games and random conversation until late. By midnight, Chris suggested he should stay over since I clearly wasn't at ease. I agreed without hesitation. We laid blankets out on the floor, joking to mask the tension, though both of us occasionally fell silent, listening. Every creak of the house or rustle from the yard outside seemed magnified. Deep down, I prayed it was all in my imagination, that the night would pass quietly without any more visitors lurking beyond the glass. The next morning, sunlight slipped through the curtains, yet the heaviness of the night before still clung to me. I woke with a restless feeling, replaying the image of that shadowy figure in the garden over and over. Chris looked just as tired, his eyes ringed with sleeplessness. He suggested we do something to distract ourselves, get out of the house, clear our heads. A camping trip in the nearby woods seemed like a harmless idea. Maybe fresh air and daylight would wash away the fear that had settled in our bones. We packed quickly, gathering a tent, a lantern, and a few snacks. The trail into the forest was familiar, but that day it felt different. Every step carried a weight, as though unseen eyes followed our movements. The morning sun filtered through the leaves, casting strange shifting patterns on the ground. The breeze stirred the branches, making them whisper among themselves, and I kept telling myself that the sound was nothing more than wind. Still, unease gnawed at me. Eventually, we found a small clearing deep in the woods and set up camp. The tent went up without trouble, and we built a small fire to cook over later. During the day, things seemed almost normal. We laughed, shared ghost stories, and for a while it felt like we had outrun the strange presence from the night before. Yet in moments of silence, a faint noise would creep in, soft, metallic, like both of us froze when we heard it clearly for the first time. The sound came from deeper in the woods, near the old swing set we had spotted on the way in. Slowly I turned my head, and there it was. The wooden swing shifting back and forth, creaking gently as though someone had just sat on it. But no one was there. Chris hadn't gone near it. The air grew noticeably colder. The forest, once alive with chirping and rustling, fell into an eerie silence. For a long moment, we said nothing, holding our breath. Yet the unspoken truth hung heavy between us. We weren't alone in the woods. Night fell, and the forest grew strangely silent, as if the trees themselves were holding their breath. Inside the tent, Chris and I lay wrapped in thin sleeping bags, the faint glow of our lantern casting soft shadows against the fabric walls. At first, everything seemed calm. My eyes grew heavy, and I drifted into sleep, until the nightmare came. In the dream, I saw a towering figure, its body twisted, its face half human, half feline. Its eyes gleamed like twin embers in the dark, and its mouth stretched unnaturally wide, splitting almost to its ears. Each step it took made the ground quake, sending a vibration through my chest. I tried to scream, to call for Chris, but my throat locked shut. No sound escaped. The terror grew unbearable, pressing down on me until I suddenly jolted awake, gasping for air, sweat soaking my shirt. It took me a moment to realize what was wrong. The tent was darker than before. The lantern was no longer beside the flap where Chris had left it earlier. My eyes darted outside and my blood ran cold. The lantern was now hanging high from the branch of a tree, swaying gently in the night air, several meters above us. There was no possible way it could have ended up there on its own. I shook Chris awake, my voice trembling as I urged him to look. Together we stepped outside, our breath visible in the unnaturally cold air. Mist curled low around our ankles. We stared at the lantern dangling from the branch, its dim light flickering, and I felt a chill crawl down my spine. Who had touched it? Who had been close enough to move it while we slept? When we returned to the tent, the answer became horrifyingly clear. Our sleeping bags had been shoved into a corner, our backpacks were overturned, contents spilling onto the ground, and in the middle of the tent, crouching low, was a tall, shadowy figure. It did not move, but I could feel its eyes locked onto us, patient and unblinking, like a predator that had been waiting for this moment all along. We stumbled backward from the tent, hearts pounding so hard I could barely breathe. Whatever was inside wasn't human. In the faint glow of the lantern, still dangling impossibly high from the tree, the figure loomed tall, its back nearly brushing the ceiling of the fabric, its eyes reflected with a dull, unnatural shine, and every movement it made scraped out a brittle sound, like bones grinding together. I had never seen anything like it. "Run!" Chris screamed. Instinct took over, and I bolted after him, tearing through the woods. Branches lashed my face, roots snagged my feet, but nothing could slow us down. Behind us came the sound, click, 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 like nails tapping in rapid succession against wood. The rhythm was steady, deliberate, growing closer with every second. Then came the voice. "Don't leave me behind," it called in Chris's exact tone. I whipped my head around. Chris was still sprinting at my side, his breathing ragged, his eyes wide with terror. The realization hit like ice down my spine. That thing could mimic us. It wasn't just following, it was playing with us. We ran harder, forcing our bodies forward, lungs screaming for air. The clicking never stopped. Sometimes it seemed far behind, sometimes terrifyingly close, as if the sound itself was echoing from every tree around us. Every heavy thud of its steps shook the earth just enough to make my chest tighten. Through the branches I caught sight of light, pale, distant, but unmistakably real. A clearing, the edge of the woods. We pushed toward it with everything we had left. At last, we broke free from the trees, stumbling onto the dirt path that led back toward my neighborhood. I dared a glance over my shoulder. The forest stood silent, shadows stretching unnaturally deep. But the figure had stopped just beyond the tree line, watching, waiting. I don't know why it let us go that night. Maybe it was curious, maybe it was hungry but patient. All I know is that we escaped only because it wanted us to. And something in me knew it wasn't finished. We stumbled back into my house, barely able to stand as we slammed the door shut behind us. Both of us were drenched in sweat, our lungs burning, our hearts racing so violently it felt like they might burst. The yard outside was silent, but that silence was more terrifying than any noise could have been. Neither of us dared to look out the windows. Instead, we rushed into the bathroom, the only room in the house without a window, and locked the door tight. Inside, we crouched together on the cold tiles, saying almost nothing. Every creak of the pipes, every faint groan of the house settling made us flinch. Now and then, I thought I could hear it again, that faint click-click sound echoing from somewhere out in the yard. But was it real, or just my imagination, poisoned by fear? Time crawled. The ticking of the clock in the living room carried through the walls, each second dragging on like an eternity. Chris whispered that maybe we should call the police, but even he didn't sound convinced. What would we say? That we were chased through the woods by a creature that could mimic human voices, something towering and faceless, lurking in the dark. No one would believe us. I wasn't even sure I believed it myself, despite what I had just lived through. We tried to sleep, but it was impossible. The adrenaline wouldn't leave our bodies. Every rustle of leaves outside, every groan of the floorboards above made us jolt awake, our nerves raw and frayed. I just kept wishing for the sun to rise, desperate for daylight to banish the nightmare. When dawn finally came, light streamed through the cracks beneath the bathroom door. We crept out cautiously. The house was untouched. No broken windows, no open doors, no tracks in the grass outside. It looked as if nothing had ever happened, but we knew better. The fear hadn't left. It lingered like a shadow over us. Deep down, I felt certain the thing was still out there, waiting. And the thought chilled me more than the chase itself. This wasn't over. Night had fallen, and the house sank once more into a heavy silence. I kept telling myself that what happened in the forest was nothing more than a lingering nightmare, a cruel trick of exhaustion and imagination. Chris sat quietly beside me, his face pale, eyes darting toward every corner of the room, as if the smallest sound might send him running again. We barely spoke. The silence between us was fragile, almost protective, as though words might shatter it. Then, as I stood in the kitchen pouring water, a sound broke the stillness. Click, click, click. It echoed faintly from the backyard. The noise was so familiar that my stomach dropped. My grip on the glass trembled, nearly slipping from my hands. Chris lifted his head instantly, terror flashing in his eyes. He had heard it too. Slowly, as if pulled by some invisible force, we turned toward the window. The garden outside lay bathed in pale, washed-out moonlight. At first, the shadows seemed ordinary: trees, fences, the outline of the patio. But then I saw it, a tall figure, motionless, half hidden among the bushes. It wasn't the patio umbrella, nor any object I could explain away. No, this shape was wrong. Taller than the fence, unnaturally thin, its outline shifting as though it didn't belong to this world. With every slight movement it made, the sound returned, clicking, steady and deliberate, like fingernails tapping against wood. Each step forward seemed impossibly slow, but the dread in my chest only grew heavier. I couldn't breathe. My hand clutched Chris's tightly, and together we backed away from the window, deeper into the kitchen, praying that whatever was out there would vanish if we looked away. But the figure did not stop. The window frame quivered faintly, as though something had brushed against the glass. In that chilling moment, the truth struck me with undeniable clarity. Whatever that thing was, it had followed us from the forest, and it wasn't going to leave.